What's going on, y'all? It's Jay Myrex of Altruist.com. Have you ever bought some new gear and you started to try to use it in your music production studio, like new gear, new software, DAWs, really anything? If you ever bought anything new and you start trying to use it and you started to get frustrated because the music that you were doing didn't sound as good as what you were doing before you got the new gear, then this video is for you. So check it out. We're going to be discussing this topic, and I'm also going to provide you with some strategies and some thoughts about how you can get away from getting stuck in this trap of getting frustrated when you get some new gear and it doesn't quite sound as good as what you were doing before. So stay tuned, check out the video, and then let me know your thoughts in the comments. I know for some of you guys, you may have seen the thumbnail and thought, oh, here we go. Jay Myrex is having issues with his new MPC XSE that he hasn't had for more than a few months. That is not what this video is about, actually. It is related, but it is not exactly that. I've talked to music producers in my circle for a long time, and this is actually a commonly occurring theme. The theme is basically this. You're a producer, you've been working a certain way for some time, and then you decide you want to do an upgrade in the studio. So you get a new piece of gear and you start using that new piece of gear only to get disenfranchised by the new gear as you start to compare the sound that you're getting from the new gear against some of your old tracks. And you start saying, man, the music ain't hitting the way it used to. That's what this is really inspired by. It's inspired by that phenomenon. I've seen it happen. I've experienced it in my career as well. I've replaced something that was a staple in the studio and then started to use it only to start to question what I was hearing and get a little bit self-conscious about the fact that the music wasn't sounding as good as it used to. I've also seen that this is something that impacts our favorite producers. Some of you guys are familiar with producers such as Alchemist and Timbaland and Erick Sermon, DJ Quik, and a lot of other producers that have progressed and gone from using one piece of equipment in their legendary classic eras to something completely different in today's era. Timbaland was a notable ASR 10 user, and a lot of the records that we come to love from him were also produced using the ASR 10. In today's era, he's probably moved on to a lot of other things. I've seen him working in Ableton, and even during the days where he was working with Justin Timberlake, I'm sure he was using a lot of other stuff. But a lot of that classic stuff, like the old stuff from Aaliyah and Genuine and whatnot, and his first album with him and Magoo, that stuff was that ASR 10 era, as well as the stuff that we heard him with on Jay-Z and some of the other records that we know him from. Timbaland's gear and his studio has evolved over time. So I'm sure a lot of that was influenced by different collaborators he's had over the years and whatnot. But needless to say, he's no longer using the ASR 10. He's using Ableton and other things that help him to achieve what he's trying to go for in today's era. Similarly, the Alchemist, another example, another ASR 10 user. Alchemist switched over to the MPC 2500 years ago. I'm sure he has his reasons. I'm sure he has his preferences that have driven him that direction. Some would say that Alchemist sound has changed, and for some people it may be in a positive direction, and for some people they may say his new stuff doesn't hit the way his old stuff did. It's all subjective, right? It's all about taste, and the artists themselves may have had really specific reasons why they needed to move on from the old gear to the new gear. But in the case of the Alchemist, you may be of the opinion that, yeah, I like the old Alchemist better. One of my absolute favorites, Erick Sermon. Erick Sermon did a lot of my favorite music on the Roland W30. We're talking about like a lot of the old EPMD stuff, Muddy Waters, the first Muddy Waters by Redman, Keith Murray projects, you name it. Erick Sermon did a lot of the classic legendary stuff he's known for on the Roland W30 since he has switched over to the Motif ES. Some of us that are fans may say, oh man, his new stuff doesn't hit the way that he used to be slapping with the W30. Like everything was just locked in with the W30. I don't like the new sound that he has. So this is normal. This is something that happens with the top producers. It's not something that is unique to us that are not in this upper echelon of music production. It happens. Sometimes it happens where you're questioning your own stuff, and then sometimes it happens where the fans are questioning the sound of your new stuff. I would say even modern producers are impacted by this. This is not just a DAW thing, right? You have people like Metro Boomin, for example. Metro Boomin being a producer that really started out in FL Studio, made a lot of his biggest records and hits on FL Studio. He has since started to mess with vintage samplers like the MPC 2000 XL and the SP 1200. So he's using this stuff now as part of his new sound and his new production workflow. But there are people that would say, man, I prefer the old Metro Boomin. I like when he was just a FL guy. The new stuff, I don't really know. I don't like that. Oftentimes, I would say it's the fans, people that got accustomed to hearing their favorite artists a certain way that will question new directions with gear. Another example of this, even beyond the DAWs and the drum machines, would be this whole dynamic of just recording paradigms and how that can transform your sound. A lot of the artists who were big in the 60s and 70s, especially, are also impacted by this phenomenon. So if they were once recording with tape and a lot of analog hardware and a lot of electromechanical and physical hardware in their production, their instruments are analog synthesizers and real guitars, real keyboards, real pianos, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of those acts that were really big in the 60s and 70s, once the 80s came, things started to change because they started to use new types of sounds, especially on the drums. A lot of drum machines became popular. A lot of digital synthesizers started to come in the 80s. And this started to change the sound of the productions and the records that these people were making. As a fan, some of us that are expecting the old sound may say, man, my favorite band doesn't hit the same anymore. Like the music doesn't sound as good as it used to. This is very common. I can name several bands and whatnot that definitely changed their sound from the 70s to the 80s. A very good example of this would be the Isley Brothers. Isley Brothers had a sound in the 70s that was one way. And then by the time we get to the 80s, their sound changed. Stevie Wonder is another good example. During Stevie Wonder's golden era, these 5 records that he made that basically were flawless, they had a sound. And then as we move into the 80s, some may argue that Stevie Wonder's music didn't hit the same way anymore. This is all subjective, by the way. This is not necessarily my opinion on all of these artists, but this is commonly spoken about when we start talking about these artists and their catalog overall. So I'm just bringing this up to also just illustrate that this is not a unique phenomenon for a music producer or anyone that's creating music, especially as you start to experiment with new equipment and also new software. This is really not just about any tools, but it's definitely not just about hardware. There's this whole debate that exists in the software domain, especially with respect to FL Studio. And there are a number of people in the camp that say that FL Studio 11 sounds better than the current version of FL Studio. There's whole threads about it. So it's important that we just keep in mind that this is not just about hardware. This is about music production and the different tools and different things that we may incorporate over time as we try to expand our sound or when we need to shift gears and move into a different direction. These different tools may have an impact on the way our sounds translate to the audience, and we may start to question it as producers. Now I want to talk about some observations that I have on things that may cause this phenomenon. New tools do sound different, especially in the domain of hardware, but just in general, any sound generating tool, when there's new versions of it, you have to expect that it's going to sound different to some degree. As I mentioned earlier, we recently did a whole comparison with the MPC XSE versus various drum machines just to explore the differences. They are different. They don't sound the same. None of those machines sound the same. So just generally speaking, if you say my new beats ain't hitting the same as the old and you're using a new piece of gear, it's true. It's going to sound different. Now, hitting the same, of course, it's not going to sound the same as what you were doing before. Is that better or worse? That's more subjective. Another thing I have observed is that a lot of us tend to have unrealistic expectations on new tools, especially when we need to use that tool as the centerpiece of our production. The problem is when we need to use a new tool as the centerpiece of our production, we are fundamentally changing the most important aspect of achieving our sound. So it's unrealistic for you to change the centerpiece and expect that you can preserve your sound and still get the exact same sound you are getting with a different centerpiece. You may stylistically be able to do a lot of the same things that you were doing with your old equipment, but sound-wise and impact-wise, and also just the overall genesis of the sounds that you're making and the way that the track is developed are going to be different. And you may go in different directions with a new centerpiece. Positive or negative, that's all subjective, but you have to respect that it's going to be different. So some of us have a very unrealistic expectation when we change our centerpiece. I saw it firsthand back when I was first starting out with Native Instruments and we were talking about the whole moving from the MPC to machine and all of this stuff.
A lot of people are asking me things about machine and how it compares to the MPC and how to come from an MPC to machine. And I think it's important to take a couple steps back and to realize that machine is not an MPC at all. Machine is its own instrument. Machine has never been an MPC and it never will be an MPC.
Everybody wanted the machine to work exactly like the MPC and all of this. And literally they are different samplers and they have different workflows. They have different creative possibilities. The expectation was unrealistic. Another thing I have observed is that oftentimes we simply lack the familiarity with the new tool. And that can compound the dissatisfaction that we have when we are working with our new tools, especially when we're not getting the results that we expect. Our lack of command with the new equipment can cause us to prematurely judge a new tool, especially when we don't immediately get good results out of it. So when you start talking about, oh, my new beats ain't hitting the same. Well, do you have command over this new hardware is the question, or this new tool is the question. Are you using it to a degree where there's mastery as you had once with your original piece of gear or your original setup, right? So that's another thing that we have to check ourselves on. There are other reasons why the sound that you're getting may not hit the same way, but these are some of the main observations that I've seen. Now I'd like to really address some things that we can do to combat this issue, because I think that's an important one. We need to look at how to combat this issue. The first thing I would say is treat every tool in your studio as a specialized tool for a specific range of tasks. When you do that, it gives you an opportunity to really dial in why you're using a product or why you're using a tool, and it allows you to make a bit more of a intentional decision on why you're using it at any time. Don't buy new tools to recreate an old sound that you've already achieved with another tool. That's a super important point. When you get new tools, don't buy it because you're trying to recreate a sound that you once had with another setup. That is a recipe for failure. You're going to be disappointed because that new tool just isn't the same as what you used to use. It's simply put, it's not the same. You're not going to get the same exact results. You can avoid this frustration altogether by not using a new tool to try to recreate a sound that you've already successfully achieved with another tool set. So if you've already developed a specific sound with a specific tool or a specific set of tools, just understand that a large part or a large degree of that sound you've achieved has been influenced by the tools that you've used. If that is the case, when you want to tap back into that sound, you should be using the tools that you originally developed that sound with. That would be the wisest thing to do. Another thing that you could do is really just allow yourself time to explore what new tools can do so that you can be intentional and specific about how you use it and when you use it. So it's really about digging in and finding out what each tool shines at. When you know that, when you know exactly what each tool is giving you as far as sound and possibilities and inspiration and workflow and whatever it is, whatever the tool is and why you're using it, once you understand all of those things, then you can be very intentional and say, I'm going for this sound or I'm going for this particular vibe, so I'm going to go over here. It's about knowing exactly what your tools are giving you when you use them so that you can make that critical decision when it's time to produce a record. So give yourself time. If you're trying to retain elements of your old sound, what I would recommend first and foremost, don't sell the old gear that you used to develop that sound. Very important. Don't sell the old gear, because if you sell the old gear, then you're going to always be fighting yourself to try to get back to that old sound you had. So you're making it harder on yourself by selling the old gear if the intention really is to retain some elements of the old sound and the old workflow that you originally had. Keep your old gear and add the new gear that you want to play around with, add that into the setup, but in a more integrated way. If you add it in an integrated way, meaning if it's a MIDI-based device, right? Use MIDI, use audio, connect it together with the old stuff, connect the new with the old, MIDI it together, route it audio in and out together. Set it up in a way where both the old and new can be used together. Avoid replacing your centerpiece if possible. Now, you may have seen another video of me going around talking about learning new platforms. Key word is learning. It's not replacing your old platform. It's about learning additional platforms so that you can be versatile. And also it gives you a bit more range as a producer. You can work with more people in different environments and you can tap into the different advantages that these other platforms may provide you as a producer. So it expands your range, and you know, like if I'm going for this type of thing, or I know a tool that can help me to achieve XYZ a lot quicker, learning those tools is not the same thing as getting a new tool and replacing it, especially if it's your DAW, which for a lot of you guys would be the centerpiece of your studio. You don't want to get into a habit of replacing the centerpiece of your studio unless your original DAW or your original centerpiece is not serving you. If it's not serving you, of course, get something that's going to serve your needs and your workflow and your intention better. But realistically, unless you fit that qualification where the centerpiece is not serving you, it's not capable of doing the basic things that you want to do or need to be able to do to complete a record, unless you fit that category, you should not be replacing your centerpiece. So I would avoid replacing your centerpiece at all costs. Try out new things, learn new things. You can try and learn new things while keeping your centerpiece and your original workflow intact. Ultimately, you need to give yourself bandwidth and opportunity to evolve your sound. Sometimes when we acquire a new sound or a new sound generating tool, it provides us with new opportunities. So changing your sound gives you an opportunity to now address a new audience with fresh ears and fresh perspective. And you may capture new people that your old sound didn't really appeal to in the end. So this is important. This is a good opportunity. So don't overlook that part. I think sometimes we want to hang on to the old sound because we have love for the community that originally embraced us. But at the same time, it's okay to try to connect with other audiences, especially if we're still doing it with the intent of having a high artistic integrity. So it's not about dumbing down the sound or trying to sound younger or anything like that necessarily. It could just be like, hey, I would like to hear myself in a maybe an updated way or a modernized way. I would like to explore new creative areas and see how I can sound in different directions. And that may lend itself to the ears and the taste of a new audience that I didn't originally have with my old music. So this is an opportunity. New tools also may open your mind up to new creative possibilities that your old tools and processes may have kept you away from. That's a big reason that I use different tools in my studio, because the thought processes and the creative workflows that come with different tools can also be inspiring. The way I have to work on an SP1200 inspires me to be innovative in the approach and do things that I don't normally do when I'm using a DAW. Keep that in mind. Using a new tool opens up new creative possibilities. So if the beats are not hitting the same as they used to, that may be okay from the perspective that you may be unlocking some new opportunities and new directions creatively.